welcome, Newmie Nation. Ben Cook here, co-founder, CEO of New Minds, and host of the New Minds podcast. We have intriguing conversations in every episode with people designed to shake up your thinking a little bit, to inspire you to action, to reframe your world, to evolve as a thinker and a doer. And today's guest is going to do just that, I guarantee it. My guest is Andrew Cooley. He is the co-founder and CEO of Esports Academy. He has over 15 years of experience in the esports world, and that is even as a professional player, a coach, player manager, and an esports business management. He has entrepreneurial experience in other places. He was the founder of, am I saying this right, Andrew? State of Mind Gaming.
Yeah.
Okay, and in there and other places, you fostered players and teams through different stages of their careers. And with that foundation that you've built, you're now kind of implementing a holistic infrastructure and a coaching certification program. You're partnering with academic institutions, having camps, doing one-on-one training teams. We're going to get into all of that, and I can't wait. My favorite part of this episode, I think, is going to be really breaking some stereotypes and paradigms that people have about esports and gaming in general. So with that said, Andrew, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Okay, so I'm gonna actually open with a little bit of a confession. So I first met you a few months ago. I had the opportunity to sit in on a presentation you were giving about your company, and I thought, as a person in the education field, kind of on the front edge of the progressive methodologies and frameworks, I thought I was pretty up to speed about how these what we thought were tangential fields could impact education. But when I heard your presentation about esports, I have to admit, I was blown away, and I had to confess to myself that I was holding a lot of stereotypes about esports and the impact they could really have. And It was really enlightening for me. And since then, I've really reframed my thinking about esports, and that's really in great part to you and how you presented it. So could you start a little bit by just laying out, like, what is a stereotype about esports and gaming and gamers that you encounter all the time, and then a little bit about what's the reality?
Sure. Yeah, I think that what you touched on is pretty commonplace, so that a lot of people kind of have that stereotype that live in their parents' basement if they're older, or if they're young, that it's going to ruin their lives, and that it's taken away from their education, that they're rotting their brains, that they're sitting there and they're just playing games and they're not learning anything, and they could be studying, or they could be, playing basketball or on a school athletic team, something of that nature, and that it's going to be way more beneficial for them. Again, it's unfit people, not mentally healthy stuff, all those kind of stereotypes. And so again, I think that it's a very common thing for a lot of people to think about. But the reality of it is that it's kind of archaic. And what I always tell people is that there's a right way and a wrong way to do anything. It doesn't matter if it's esports and gaming, or if it's something completely different. There's a right way and a wrong way to go about doing anything. And so, yeah, you could be really unhealthy, and you could sit there and, you could be really lethargic, and you could play games that are single player, and maybe they don't really challenge you to think or to be a leader or anything like that. And maybe you eat unhealthy and you drink sodas all the time. And obviously, that's not really conducive to that kind of aspect of proper health. But whenever it comes to really trying to implement it in a healthy capacity, which is what we try to do, is that you are taking accountability for kind of your health and your wellness and things of that nature, as well as learning valuable skills like leadership and like proper communication, task delegation, trusting your teammates, all those different things that you can actually take with you that can not only be beneficial just in a game itself, but they translate to, hey, I learned these skills through gaming, and now I can take them with me into my job as a social media manager or an attorney or whatever it may be, right? So, yeah, I think that's one of the big misconceptions that people have, though.
Yeah. I remember in the presentation you were highlighting things like nutrition, communication skills. You talked about how you actually monitor your players' sleep habits and their screen time, and all these things flew in the face of that old stereotype you mentioned of the kid in his parents' basement, down on bags of Cheetos, right? so, and
Yeah.
and the whole skill set you just listed are all just you know universal human skill sets that are transferable into any domain, just like you said. And that's what's so beautiful about it. It's not just about the pathway to be a pro gamer, to be an esports professional. Although that in itself also was mind blowing. But we're gonna backtrack in just a second. I want to hear more about your story and journey in
Sure.
the esports world. But just to paint the picture here, it may be a small percentage of esports players that make it to the top of the game, but just give us a little taste. What are some of the top salaries among professional esports?
Yeah, I mean, it's in millions, and that's always the shocking thing is that it's like, well, you're going to get paid millions to sit there and play a video game and click on a keyboard and use a mouse, and it's like, well, Tom Hardy or Tom Brady, sorry, Tom Brady gets millions of dollars to throw a ball, right? Like if you want to oversimplify it, then it is as simple as that. Somebody gets millions of dollars to shoot a basketball, right? Same type concept. The level of skill that it takes to obtain a contract like that, it's not just as simple as, I'm just playing a video game. There's so many other things that go into it that, equate to why that person is getting that contract. But just like with traditional sports, there's sponsorship deals and endorsements and so on and so forth. So, I mean, there's compensation packages that are, very, very lucrative for a lot of really top players that are in esports, and it'll continue to grow as the industry grows.
Yeah, and another thing that really impressed on me, the more I learn about esports, is that it really is a team effort, and there are positions just like in the physical world. There will be positional, experts, and players specialize in those positions, and the importance of communication and of emotional intelligence in order to be a top tier player, I imagine, plays a huge role.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I wanna backtrack before we jump kind of a little bit deeper into like what your projects, like what Esports Academy is all about, your mission and your structure. And I want to put on some different hats, and like maybe from the point of view of a parent, from the point of view of a teacher, how to look at this, and even from the point of view of a young player, what to expect, if they took this sort of path. But
Sure.
speaking of young players, tell us a little bit about, at what age was little Andrew realizing that, gaming and esports was a possible path for you, and how did this all come about?
Yeah, so I got started gaming when I was 3 years old. I always tell people that the first game that I played, and my parents probably would not be happy about this. The first game that I played was Doom at 3 years old on DOS, if you don't remember the DOS operating system.
Wow, old school.
Yeah. So, from there I went to, playing some different PC games, playing Super Nintendo, N64. And then around 12 years old is whenever I discovered what esports was. We were hanging out in what was back then, it was called Ventrilo. It's basically like the 1990s Discord, if you're familiar with Discord. Okay. So like really archaic there. But one of my friends hops on the channel, asks if I'm going to watch the big match. I was like, what big match? And I played Counter-Strike a lot. And so it was literally at that moment where I was like, I remember watching the match, and like my jaw was hanging open. I was like, this is amazing. Like, man, I wish that I could do this as a profession, but there's no way that like it would ever be, lucrative enough to have a sustainable living and do this. And I've never been happier about like being wrong about something and like seeing how much the industry has grown. But yeah, I think like what I typically tell people is 12 years old is when I got started in esports, because from that moment on, everything was, full steam ahead on. All I cared about was performance. I'd sit in like geometry class, English, whatever it may be. I was usually the team captain. So I'm sitting there like writing down strategies, coming up with new stuff, like thinking through performance stuff. So yeah, I kind of got a start, I guess, early, but yeah.
Yeah. So 12 years old, like you mentioned, it wasn't a super established career path at that point.
Right.
So you were, in a way, you were kind of a pioneer. and you had to kind of like dream your path forward in a way. So were there coaches available at that point? Like, were you just self-taught?
No, yeah. I mean, so that's the thing is that back then there was no coaching infrastructure. The closest thing I'd probably call a coach back then was probably Jason Lake, who's still the CEO of Complexity up in Frisco. I've been a huge fan of Complexities for a long time, and I remember I used to watch their videos a lot when I was growing up. And Jason was like always there at the tournaments. He was always behind his team. He was always rooting and cheering them on. And I think like Jason was probably the closest thing to like an esports coach back then. Not a lot of teams had coaches, if any at all. It was pretty non-existent. And so everybody was kind of self-taught. It was a team effort, right? So you're all collaborating towards a common goal, trying to communicate with each other, trying to learn from each other, trying to grow. And back then, like there wasn't a lot of people who, especially whenever you're young, who understood conflict resolution. So it's pretty common for, like team to just blow up because they just couldn't handle getting along. People were like emotions ran high. People didn't get the outcome they wanted. So people would swap teams like pretty quickly and stuff like that. So yeah, it was all self-taught and self-analyzed.
Yeah, so like a real kind of almost Lord of the Flies sort of feel, like these self-governing young people, kind of like surviving. And so wow, that's pretty intense. I like how you brought up conflict resolution, and that's where that emotional intelligence piece comes in as well. And without some kind of mentor or coach overseeing a group, I can imagine how hard it was to keep the cohesion, like you mentioned. So, okay, let me fast forward a little bit. 12 years old, you kind of like have that spark turn on, and you're kind of on these self-organizing teams, entering tournaments, it sounds like. As you kind of move through secondary school and you're starting to approach that traditional, coming of age moment where we graduate from high school and we go off to college. Now, what was that thinking process or conversation like with your parents? How open were they to this aspect of you? Were they still expecting you to kind of like, kind of snap out of it at some point and take a traditional career path?
Oh yeah. I always tell kids, like one of my favorite things is, much like what happened with you, is if I ever have a kid in a camp or that I'm working with at a school and they're like, I really want to pursue esports, but my parents don't approve of it, I'm like, let me talk to them. Because I grew up, like, you think it may not be good now for like parents to be receptive of it. Oh, I grew up with a completely different dynamic. My parents were not accepting of it at all. My dad's most famous quote that I tell people was, "Get off that damn game." Okay. He always wanted me to study hard and focus on that. And it was, again, it goes back to the stereotype of I was rotting my brain away. I was just wasting my time and it wasn't ever going to go anywhere. And I just needed to get off the game and to study. I don't think that, I don't think that they understood it at all, but whenever it got to the point of, going off to college, I went off and I got my degree in financial planning. Even whenever I was at school, though, I was practicing a lot because back then, at that point in time, World of Warcraft was my primary game. Yeah. And so I was very high ranked in the what's referred to as arenas in World of Warcraft, and so I was focusing on that. Still going to school, but definitely dedicating a lot of time to practicing then. But yeah, I think that they thought that at some point, it was just going to go away and that I would snap out of it. And here we are now, 31, and I haven't really snapped out of it yet.
Yeah. You navigated that middle path, it sounds like, really skillfully, and went forward on a traditional path, but at the same time maintaining your passion and developing it. And they've kind of seemed to have kind of merged together in a way now. As an entrepreneur, I'm sure the finance comes extremely useful.
Yeah, I spent 5 years in the financial services industry, and I was a financial advisor for a little while. And I think that there's a lot of things that I took away from that industry that definitely help with the entrepreneurial side and with business in general. But I mean, much like the reaction we've talked about, first day whenever I started with the last firm that I was at, they asked what my hobbies were, and I tried to, because this was 7 years ago, and so I was trying to explain like what esports was 7 years ago, and so I was just casually doing it. They were laughing simultaneously to asking the question. Yeah. So you got paid to play video games. Like people pay people to play video games. And I was like, yeah, you just don't get it. So
I know. You must get tired some days of the uphill slog of trying to explain it to people.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's the only way to inform people and grow the industry. And so I just accept it for what it is. And some people are really open to hearing about it, and some people are, really closed-minded and kind of ignorant to it. So it is what it is. And I take every conversation for, whatever time people want to give me to do it.
Yeah, that's great. That's a very healthy approach, I think, like one person at a time, one mind at a time.
Yeah.
But let's go back a little bit though. Tell me about that moment when you made your first dollar from esports. Like that must have been kind of a big occasion. Like, do you remember the moment?
No, and you would think so, but I didn't make seven figures, right, playing esports like people did today.
Yeah.
It wasn't near the amount of money that it is today. And back then, it wasn't ever... I think that a lot of people and a lot of competitive players and pro players would tell you that, like, back then, it wasn't about the money. You just love doing it, and you love competing. Mm-hmm. And you could be in 7th or 8th place in a tournament. You get something from it, right? But that's not good enough. You don't care about why didn't I get 5th or 6th? What can I do to get 5th or 6th? What can I do to get 2nd or 3rd? What can I do to get 1st?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter about the money.
Right.
Now it matters about the money because it's sustainable and people, want to make a living and stuff like that. But, back then you want to win.
Yeah. I was just kind of visualizing that journey from that 12-year-old you who had kind of that awakening to whoa, you actually made, the amount doesn't matter, like you said, but the fact that you made some money doing that is pretty cool part of the journey. So, okay, so you were in the financial services industry for a while. You still have this passion, much more than a hobby, because you've been semi-pro and pro. What kind of drove you to make that leap to become an entrepreneur and really be a voice, be a thought leader in this industry?
So what ended up happening, I believe it was 2015 or 2016. I was okay with what I was doing, and it was good money because it was, a legitimate career and everything. But I didn't wake up feeling happy about what I was doing. And it was I had a self-analysis and just had a come to Jesus talk with myself. And I was like, is this how I want to spend my life? Do I want to wake up every day not being happy with what I'm doing? And I didn't. And so it was at that point that, eSport, there was legitimate discussions around franchising with League of Legends, which is a really big move, and, how they were going to change the infrastructure for the future. Mark Cuban started talking about esports because he was appearing at some of the tournaments as kind of like a celebrity figure. And so it was an eye-opening moment for me where it's hey, this could really take off. And I was because I always did esports no matter what. So while I was a financial advisor, I wasn't able to be a competitor or player as much, but I was able to do coaching and stuff on the side. And so it's still I still had roots in it, obviously, and I didn't want to be disconnected from it. But it was at that time that I was I want to actually make a career out of this. This is what I love. This is what I like. This is what I've done my whole life. No matter what, this is what I've always done and gone back to. And it never feels like work to me. It's just what I love doing.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of whenever I decided to make the transition. I had started an organization back in college that was designed to be a pro organization called State of Mind Gaming. Didn't really do anything with it, but then I ended up kind of resurrecting it at that point. And I was like, I want to make State of Mind Gaming Dallas's professional esports organization. And so I started going and trying to fundraise, and I started talking to people. I got laughed at relentlessly. It was a regionalized professional esports team. Why would you ever need that? Esports is all online. You don't need teams to be local. And so I was like, okay, cool. You also just don't get it. So yeah, no, I got laughed at, but that's kind of whenever I made the transition to State of Mind Gaming, which ultimately ended up leading me to Chris Cheney, who's one of our advisors at EPA, but he was the CEO and founder of Infinite Esports and Entertainment. So that's where I wound up after State of Mind.
Okay, beautiful. So I like how you kind of you zeroed in on that feeling of discontentment that you were having in the other job. like you said, it was a legitimate career. I'm sure you were making good money, but it just wasn't totally aligned with what was calling you. I talk a lot about this concept called ikigai. It's this Japanese concept that we all have kind of somewhere in us this reason for being, and then when we find it, it's this alignment of something we're really passionate about, something we're talented in and good at, and something the world needs and can actually provide for us financially. And that when we do find that sweet spot, it's like you said, you don't even feel like you're working. Like your life is kind of gets closer and closer to flow. So I like that piece of the story and kind of making that connection. So, okay, beautiful. So you made the leap again against doubters. I won't call them haters, but against the doubters who kind of laughed in your face, literally. You persisted, and here you are. Tell me a little bit about, let's start with the point of view of I'm a young gamer. Okay, let's say I don't know, like how young do you start kind of recruiting and coaching kids?
It really depends. Like, people always want to put an age demographic on it, but it's really hard because obviously it depends on what degree of fascination and adaptation and interest you have in it, right? Because I can go coach a 11 or 12-year-old who likes playing Fortnite, and like that's fun for him and he likes doing it with his friends. But I can also go coach a different 11 or 12-year-old at Fortnite, and he's like, hey, but what am I doing wrong here? And I've tried and I've practiced all these different things, and like I'm just trying to figure out where I need to improve next. And so it's not really age-based, because I can also go find another 10-year-old that's on like that higher level of play. So I think it's on a person-by-person basis, but I mean, it really kind of between that 10 to 14 year old age bracket, within that range, that's when you really start to see kids that it's really piquing their interest. They're really wanting to get ingrained and involved. But having said that, I mean, there's a video out there that floated around for a while of a 5-year-old who's playing Call of Duty with his dad, and he's better than like some 20-year-olds. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think that as the industry becomes more prominent, you're going to kind of see shifts, and it's really just going to be on a person-by-person basis, just like with traditional sports.
Yeah. I love how you brought that up. That really aligns with New Mind's philosophy. We talk a lot about asynchronous development. Like you can't base everything on a person's chronological age, especially when it comes to kids and there's so much variance. And when you're talking about something that's really passion driven, mm-hmm. for a young person to have some good raw talent in esports, I imagine it has to be fueled by an intense passion and curiosity. So I like how you kind of made that clear, that it's not really about cutoff ages. It's more about like the individual and what they're bringing to the table. Okay, beautiful. So that being said, let's say I'm a young person, let's say 12 years old like you were, and I do have a passion for gaming, and I've got really supportive parents, and I get hooked up with Esports Performance Academy. What is it that you can help me with? Tell me a little bit about kind of like a day in the life. I know I don't live there, but just tell me a little bit about what happens when I enter your program.
Sure. So it really depends on what they're wanting to do. Obviously, we focus on holistic training like we've talked about. So it's not just about, am I missing my shots in game, or am I having poor communication or poor leadership with my team? Again, it goes back to, everything in esports, it's all fed by cognitive function. So it's, are you supporting good cognitive health? Are you getting enough sleep? There's a lot of kids at that young of an age that they like to stay up and grind the game until, 1 or 2 a.m. That's not really healthy. Not only is that not healthy because you're going to inhibit your cognitive function because you're not getting enough sleep, but you're also more likely to encounter burnout. So you're going to be burned out from the game. You're not going to want to play anymore. And so then that inhibits your progress, your positive progress, right? So we're tracking and monitoring all of that kind of stuff in conjunction with looking at all of the different aspects of the in-game components, and then we're kind of tying them together. And if a parent comes to us and they're like, hey, we really want you to work with our kid, he really loves it, he's really adamant about competing in esports, he's on a team, so on and so forth, then we build out kind of a program specific to them. So
Okay, so it's pretty customized. That's great, depending on the goals of the person. Okay,
Right.
so let's advance that kid a little bit. A few years in, let's say they're getting a little bit closer to traditional college age, and tell me a little bit about the decisions and that track. Like, at what point are you going to determine, like, hey, I think it's worth your energy to try to push this pro esports thing? Or at what point does it just become like a conversation about, like, look, this is a beautiful lifetime hobby, but I think you should probably take a traditional education?
Yeah. So I mean, if we've spent enough time with them, obviously, let's say we've been working with them all along. It really depends on what level of play they're at. Just like, again, it goes back to, there's so many similarities that can be drawn from traditional sports to esports. If it's a matter of they really are a top player, they've had, a lot of success, then we'll do from there is we'll start having different talks with them around, like, how to go through contracts, how to behave on social media and have good social media etiquette. Because the last thing you want to do is, be a promising player and you go blow yourself up on social media and nobody wants to touch you because you've behaved poorly, or then you have a strike against you on your account, because you have to pass. Like, I'll give you the example of like Valorant or League of Legends specifically. You have to pass what's called a toxicity check. So if you have a bunch of stuff against your account because you've been typing and talking crap to people, then you'll be prohibited from playing for, I think, 6 months. So we go through all of those external aspects, as well as trying to actually use our network to be able to get them in front of people and get them placed, to be able to get them on a team if they really are a promising player. If it is more of a path of, hey, you're a good player, but it probably is going to be a hobby, but you can still utilize it. You're good enough to go and play at collegiate. Then that's great, because then you're getting a scholarship. You're getting some free college out of this, quote, hobby. And maybe you go and you utilize that. You get to compete. You get to work with a team. Maybe you're the team captain or something like that. You get a scholarship and get your schooling paid for. Maybe you go and get your degree in accounting or finance or whatever it may be. Or maybe you, again, go into marketing. Well, if esports has always been your thing and you love competing and you love the game, well, you're going to know it really well, and you're going to know how it applies to those fields, and you'll be able to go and work in those fields for, let's say, a Cloud9 or a TSM or a Team Liquid or EPA, maybe, right? You'll be able to apply your degree and your intimate knowledge of esports to working in that specific field for an esports brand.
Yeah, wonderful. And recently I was reading about when professional skateboarding was first emerging, how some of these big sponsors and teams would come sort of take advantage of these young skateboarders because they didn't have representation. They didn't really know how to navigate. They didn't have the social, self-management skills. And it sounds like maybe in the early esports days, there was some of that as well. And you guys helped mitigate it, where kind of like you're kind of mentoring and coaching them through this kind of contract process and managing their self-image and public relations and self-branding. So it sounds like a real complete package that you have available there. So you kind of already answered this, but now I want to put the hat on of, like, the kind of skeptical parent. So now I'm the parent of that 12, 13-year-old. And, I know that my kid is super passionate about gaming and esports. And they've come to me, they've told me about Esports Performance Academy or some other similar, program. And I'm kind of on the fence. Like, give me the argument to the parent who's maybe open but skeptical about why this could be just as fruitful for my child as any other traditional sport or activity.
Yeah, and I mean that's usually how I try to demyth or debunk the entire misconception, or just simply translate it into terms that they really understand and are familiar with. Right? It's okay. Well, would you be okay with your child playing basketball or soccer or football? Well, yeah. Okay. Well, if he got a scholarship for that, would you be okay with that? Well, yeah, of course he's getting free college. It costs me less money, or it costs him less money, whatever it may be. Right? So you can get those things through esports. So it's a pretty simple conversation there. But I mean, again, it goes back to kind of the career pathing that I talked about, and kind of what I mentioned previously, that there are so many career opportunities for the industry now that, didn't exist even a few years ago. And it's so much more readily available. And so if you go and you get the criteria and you go and you get a degree in that, and you're like, oh yeah, I went and I got my degree in marketing. Also, I've been a big fan of y'all's organization. I follow you guys on all of your social medias. I follow all of your matches and stuff. Like you know the brand, you know the organization, you have an idea of it, and you got your degree in it. Well, yeah, that's going to be really favorable for somebody to hire you like that. So career opportunities, scholarships, but again, it goes back to also those transferable soft skills that you're in a team environment. You're learning how to work with people, regardless of if it's in an office or if it's in a team. I mean, realistically, if you're in that high pressure situation, whenever you get to an office environment, it's likely not going to be as high pressure on a minute to minute basis as it is in those games. So you're going to understand how to communicate at a much better level, or how to lead your team, or how to task delegate whenever you get to the point of being a manager or working with collaborating on other departments on projects. So yeah, there's a lot of benefit for kids. And I think that once you have that conversation with parents, they're very receptive to, how quickly can we work with you?
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think framing it in terms of making an analogy to a traditional team sport or even an individual sport, and seeing that pathway to maybe a scholarship, playing at the collegiate level, I think that's a great way to frame it for parents. And there might even be more benefits to some of the transferable skills that you mentioned. That's wonderful. So I want to put the third hat that I want to put on is that of the educator, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that you've convinced educators before, because I know that you partner with schools and school districts, and you actually go in and you have esports as an elective at some schools. So tell me a little bit about what's the case for esports in education.
Yeah, so I think that right now it's still on the cusp of, not every school district is going to have an esports program. Not every school district can afford it. Not every school district understands it and wants to have it. And so once you have those conversations and they're receptive of it, and they're wanting to build a program, it's usually in the mindset of, well, why do you have a football program? Well, it allows these kids all these options. Okay, again, same thing with esports. It allows the kids all these opportunities. But I think that one of the biggest things that one of our clients has told us is that it's an inclusivity aspect. That there's I think it was 70 to 80% of students that participated in an esports or in their esports program hadn't participated in any other aspect in the school, any other extracurricular activity rather. And so that's really, whenever you think about it, like, that's really daunting, right? And that's really important, is that having that aspect of inclusivity, and that feeling like, hey, I'm with a group of people that we have a common hobby. We have a something that, like, we all want to work towards together. I think that that's a big thing as you grow up. Yeah. And so it's not just a matter of, you're playing with strangers on the internet anymore, but now you actually have that, well, in a pre-COVID world, you have that in-face connection. You have that in-face, we're working on this together. And it's really exciting. Like, whenever we do get to work with schools and work with their teams in person, it's really exciting to, whenever you teach the kid something that he had no idea about, that he, like, you can see it, like, in their face, the epiphany or the realization of, oh man, I didn't know that. And then they know that they're going to improve. And then to be able to go back and look at the educators, like the coaches and the teachers and the administration, and see that, like, see it click and be like, oh, this is why it's, inclusive, that they're now getting to collaborate with their teammates. They're getting to work towards this. They're getting excited. And I'll tell you right now that the unfortunate thing is that with COVID, all of these traditional sports programs just don't exist, right? They can't have them. Yeah. And so one of our clients came back, and we were on the cusp of having an in-person tournament. And then the day before we were supposed to have the tournament, that's where everything shut down. And so they were like, hey, can we do this online still? So we went and we conducted the tournament online, and it was great, because there were so many kids that attended. There were so many kids that did it. We streamed it online on Twitch, and everybody had a great time. And so it's the inclusivity for the kids and the community for the school of getting to participate and watch their friends too. So I think that there's a lot of benefits from it. And I think that the benefits will only continue to grow to be, again, more reflective of traditional sports from, be it revenue opportunities for the school districts that they need to look for, or partnership opportunities or whatever it may be. But the teachers are getting to see a different side, I think, that their students by being able to have these esports programs and work with them on them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm assuming and presuming that maybe your industry and your business has seen a boost in the COVID era because it is so adaptable to the virtual environment.
I hate saying this, but yes.
Yeah.
Because I understand the current economic climate, and so I get it. But yeah, I mean, it hasn't been bad.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, right? You just happen to be on a platform that's very virtual friendly as it is, and you've met a need. So you were speaking of inclusivity, and I want to bring up like a different type of inclusivity. And I don't know, another stereotype of the esports player is that they're a white male, right? And so maybe this isn't something that has been confronted yet by the industry, but is there a gender gap? Is there are there racial gaps in esports?
Yeah, there are some gaps, and through conversations that I've had through making technology more accessible or through getting it in front of different demographics, things of that nature, I think that the industry is already working on, hey, esports is a thing now and it's really great. Now let's try to look at the gaps that we have and try to start filling those to make it accessible to everybody, inclusive of everybody. And so I think that there are a lot of initiatives around that already.
Yeah.
And I think there will continue to be more for sure.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good news. So, and speaking of the future of the industry, so I think last year I heard Mark Cuban say that esports are a better investment for the future than the NFL. And those are big words from someone who knows what he's talking about. So what are your projections about how this realm of esports could grow and develop and morph in the next couple of years?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you bring up Mark Cuban saying that, just because Mark Cuban has flip-flopped on his interest in esports, and he feels bearish or bullish on it several times at this point.
Okay.
So it's funny to hear that, but I'm glad that he is more bullish on it at this point. But I think that it's only going to continue to grow, and that has to do with some of the work that we're trying to do. Is that we're trying to help establish and create that kind of developmental infrastructure that you go and you see with traditional sports, right? Like YMCA, middle school, high school, collegiate. There's G leagues for basketball, right? And then the pro scene. And then, the all-star teams or the Olympics and stuff like that beyond that. But I think that bottom, half that I just mentioned, that doesn't really exist in the most stable of forms. It really didn't exist a couple of years ago. Now you're starting to see people like really understand, like, that's great that we have a pro scene, but how do we make that accessible and stable? And so even the pro teams are realizing that, you can take this really great kid that performs really well individually at the top of this ladder and he's played on his own. That doesn't make him a great team player. Just because he has all this talent. And so it's the matter of like, okay, well, let's introduce them to the team structure, to a coaching structure early on, and then it's just normal throughout. And then whenever he gets to this point, well, great, then you have a really fantastic, well-rounded player to be introduced into the infrastructure that you've created at your organization. Anyway, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent right there, but I think that it's only going to grow more and more across all the levels of play. And talking about, with you in one of our previous conversations about, kids getting into esports at an even earlier age. So I think that Mark Cuban is exactly correct. The industry will only continue to grow. And I always I relate it to, again, if you go and you look at traditional sports, which I think I've said that about 6 times now during this conversation, sorry. But if you go and you look at it, at some point, basketball and football didn't exist. And then it existed and it became really popular. And then it became normal because the original generation, they loved it. And so the kids grow up and that's all they know is basketball and football because their parents watch it and they love it. So the same thing will happen with esports. Esports will become normal because people like me and others that love esports, they will watch it, and whenever they have kids, that will be normal, and they will know esports, and they'll grow up. And so again, the interest level will continue to grow, and it's a global thing. So it's great, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, esports as an Olympic sport, is it coming?
Probably in some way, shape, form, or fashion. I don't know about for the games that we particularly work in, just because I think from the conversations and from the articles I've read that it's no blood or no violence, nothing too aggressive, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I completely understand that, and that's fine. So I think that in some capacity it will be in the Olympics in the future, but I don't think that it will be the most popular titles that exist. But I mean, again, that's the great thing about esports is you never know what's going to be created next year, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe next year the most popular title in the world gets created and it's Olympic friendly.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I love how what you're describing really sounds just like an evolving ecosystem. Like you said, any other mainstream sport nowadays had to start somewhere, and an ecosystem grew up around it that funneled kids at a young age into the right streams to get mentored, to get coached, to get opportunities, to develop skill sets. And that's what seems to be happening with esports, is this funnel's kind of getting created. And I think there are other frontiers as well. You alluded to it just a little bit, but yeah, I think esports as an actual platform for delivering content is somewhere on the horizon as well. Like, maybe it has to be modified, more kid-friendly games that come about. But if you've already got that built-in engagement factor of getting a kid in there doing esports, why not also use it as a way to integrate some content knowledge? We've already emphasized like the soft skill development that comes naturally, but why not some content development as well? I think that could be on the horizon as well. So, all right. So folks watching, they have your URL there, epa.gg. That's the place to go if I'm a parent, if I'm an educator, if I'm a kid and I want to learn more. Yeah.
You can go to our website. It's fairly limited what's on there, but there's a form for you to reach out. So because we're still in the process of building out version 2 of our website. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, they can access the website and reach out to us, and we'll email.
Excellent. So I know you're Dallas area based, but can you, in this virtual world, can you coach and guide people from anywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. With one of our partners this summer, esports camps, we were able to conduct, I think it was about 6 or 7 weeks straight of digital camps. And we did it with people all over the country as well as in Canada. So yeah, it's no problem at all.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That is one of those silver linings of this new era, is a lot of the geographical boundaries have melted away. And so we can connect on different levels. So Andrew, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. It was a super intriguing conversation. I think it was eye-opening in a lot of ways. I can't wait to sort of watch the evolution of esports and see what happens in the coming months and years. And I'd love to have you back on the podcast down the line as these evolutions happen, and we can dig a little deeper even.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Ben.
All right, take care. Have a great day.
You too.
Okay.